when it comes to the zealous advocacy for free software, nothing measures up to the Free Software Foundation or FSF. Or Richard Stallman, who is kind of the personification of this ideological free software zealot who is not concerned about puny worldly practical considerations when it comes to free software, only the basic ethics of software freedom and the ideological considerations. And so a lot of people, even I, have our disagreements with the Free Software Foundations because of that. But whenever I have a disagreement with them based on some practical matter, based on some application of free software, I still respect their ideologically based opinions, and I 100% support that the Free Software Foundation itself should be this very strictly ideologically motivated entity, because when we are using free software, we always have to kind of, balance carefully the considerations on the ethical and ideological side versus the practical considerations based on our hardware, based on software our peers use, and things like that. But the Free Software Foundation is good that we have them as kind of this shining beacon of pure ideology to whom we cannot really measure up to, but they are always there to kind of compare ourselves to and see where we stand when it comes to the state of free software in our own personal use. And so now that I got this out of the way and I did my tribute to the Free Software Foundation, let me argue with something. So this is a site that I was linked to, and this in an internet discourse, of course, because why shouldn't I farm social media disagreements for content on YouTube, right? And this is kind of a part of a larger theme on the GNU.org website. This page and GNU/Linux distros and this free system distribution guidelines, these are kind of recommended reading. You can probably find these links in the description if I was not too lazy to include them. And this is kind of these guidelines, you can read them. I did. It's kind of long and kind of boring. And the point I want to make, I can make just by going through a few examples here on this site where they try to explain why they don't endorse some of the operating systems they don't endorse. So they have a list of free GNU/Linux distributions, and they try to explain why these are not on that list. And first of all, Arch GNU/Linux. So I am an Arch user, so I know some things about Arch Linux, and one of the things I know about Arch Linux is that it is not called Arch GNU/Linux. Arch Linux is a trademark, and the project name is Arch Linux, and just putting GNU/ here just to satisfy Richard Stallman's 2-decade and some old email, which became a copy pasta on the Linux forums, is just rude, man. It's just rude putting it here. Anyways, Arch has no policy against distributing non-free software through their normal channels, and non-free blobs are shipped with their kernel Linux. So first of all, this is a perfectly fine sentence. What is up with their kernel, Linux? This is how the Free Software Foundation talks about Linux. It's always reminding you that Linux is just a kernel. Just as a reference back to Stallman's old email. Okay, so Arch has no policy against distributing non-free software. Yes, through their normal channels. So the normal channels, the official channels of Arch Linux are the 3 repositories that are, what is it? I think it's core, extra, and community. But I might, I'm not 100% sure if this is what the repositories are called, but there is no free software and non-free software category, or there are no separate repositories for there, and they even tell you upfront on their website that Arch Linux is not an ideology-based distribution, it's a purely practical-based distribution, and they don't care to separate the non-free and free software. So if you are more conscious about this, then you will have to check the package builds, which will contain what software package comes with what type of license. And if you don't like the non-free blobs that are in the kernel package, you might want to use your own self-packaged kernel or something. Okay, so other thing I don't really know about Kanaima or CentOS. They have the same problem that they have with Arch, so let's move on. Debian GNU Linux. So I think probably Debian is actually called Debian GNU/Linux, so it's probably not rude what they're doing here, but it is a very interesting thing. So Debian's social contract states the goal of making Debian entirely free software. So there is the dedication from the team, and they conscientiously keep non-free software out of the official Debian system. So they have this, and this is in their free system distribution guidelines, that the project should have this commitment, and they should have the measures in place that help them keep this commitment, and they admit that they do both. But Debian also maintains the repository of non-free software. So that's a separate repository. That's not mixed in like in Arch. There is a separate repository that is containing the non-free software. The official ones only contain free software, and they say that, even the Debian project says that software is not part of the Debian system, but the Free Software Foundation is becoming the server police here, and they find it, unacceptable that these non-free software are hosted on the project's main servers. And, which is the most interesting part here, people can readily find these non-free packages by browsing Debian's online package database and its wiki. Let's read it again. And people can readily find these non-free packages. People can readily find. People can find the non-free package. So if you have a website which contains a list of packaged non-free software that your users can readily find, you are not pure enough for the Free Software Foundation. This blew my mind, actually, when I first heard this. There is also a country repository. Its packages are free, but some of them exist to load separately distributed proprietary programs. So this, I understand why this can be a problem. This too is not thoroughly separated from the main Debian distribution. So I don't know how much this is separated, but based on these previous sentences that we have here, does it mean that it's not separated enough? Does it mean that there is like a article on the Debian wiki that tells you how to activate this repository, and so this is why it's not properly separated? I don't know. Debian is the only common non-endorse distribution to keep non-free blobs out of its main distribution. So the kernel does not have these non-free binary blobs, but the Free Software Foundation thinks that the problem partly remains because non-free firmware files live in Debian's non-free repository. So we already established that they have a separate non-free repository. And the non-free firmware has been taken out of the kernel, so the kernel is only containing free things, the free software parts. And then the non-free firmware files are in the non-free repository. So it is, again, but that is hosted on the Debian server, so it's not good. And also referenced in the documentation on the Debian website. And the installer in some cases recommends them for the peripherals on the machine. Just read it again. The installer in some cases recommends them for the peripherals on the machine. I just realized you couldn't see this because of my head. But anyways. So if you have some peripherals that only have a non-free firmware available, and Debian documentation tells you how to load that non-free thing onto your system, even though it tells you it's non-free, even though you have to activate the unofficial non-free repository. The fact that the Debian org website has a page that tells you how to do that makes it not enough for the Free Software Foundation. Wow! Alright. In addition, some of the free programs that are officially part of Debian invite the user to install some non-free programs. Specifically, the Debian versions of Firefox and Chromium suggest non-free programs to install into them. Okay, so this one, I personally can kind of understand, because DRM is one of the nastiest thing you can do on the as a proprietary software. It takes up way too much resources to make sure that you don't steal someone else's intellectual property, and does it in a very sneaky way. But anyways, the Debian versions of Firefox and Chromium suggest non-free plugins to install them. But based on all these previous texts, what do they mean by suggest? That you can go onto the Firefox store and you can download the DRM? Or does it mean that when you go to Netflix and Netflix needs to download the DRM plugin so you can watch the videos on Netflix, then Firefox will tell you that for this you need to install a proprietary non-free plugin to watch. And you can click on install, and there is not just like a big S triangle with the exclamation mark in it that tells you that, sorry, this site would require you to download non-free stuff to your software, so I'm not gonna let you watch it. Is it what they want? Yes, this is what they want. This is what they want, actually. So this is not a question. That's what Free Software Foundation wants. Debian's wiki also includes pages about installing non-free firmware. This is just the same thing that we already found here. So these really blow my mind. These are the problems that they have. And Fedora have a clear policy about what can be included in distribution, and it seems to be followed carefully. Unfortunately, the decision to allow that firmware in the policy, so they keep non-free firmware. Okay, so that's for Fedora, that's nice. And I think, yeah, like if you go through all this, so this is another abomination calling Linux mint GNU/Linux. So these guys have or gals, so these people at the FSF have no respect for the branding decisions of the operating systems. OpenSUSE, so this is kind of the funny things here. OpenSUSE offers a repository of non-free software. This is an instance of how open is weaker than free. So, because OpenSUSE is called open, you have to bring up how you hate open source as a terminology. And so it just has a repository of non-free software. It doesn't tell us anything. So do you have to manually activate this repository? Is it activated on the install automatically, or does it just ask you a question whether you want to or don't want to? I don't know, and I don't care at this point. So, yeah, Ubuntu GNU/Linux. This is what someone told me to read because it will tell me how bad Ubuntu is, but actually, so while in their first paragraph they have, promotes Canonical, expressly promotes and recommends non-free software under the Ubuntu name in some of their distribution channels, and offers the option to install only free packages. So it gives you the option to be pedantic about your free software ideologies, but it does not force you. So whatever. And also firmware blobs. So, okay, we understand that. But these two paragraphs are so they put these two paragraphs of rant here in which they complain about how Canonical has some incorrect terminology or ambiguous terminology related to patents and trademarks, and how intellectual property rights should not be used as a term because the trademark and patent law and whatever patent, I think maybe patent is the correct pronunciation, I don't know, and copyright, they all are just put under intellectual property, but they are handled very differently. And I don't know why this rant has to be here. And I guess that's it. So my disappointment is unmeasurable and my day is ruined. Oh, no, not really. I mean, this is exactly what you would expect from the Free Software Foundation. What I really would like if they would have two categories, not just this free system distribution guidelines, or maybe inside this free system distribution guidelines, you could have like two categories, one that they already list there, which you could call the pedantic list, and maybe you could call one that's kind of the less pedantic list, in which everything by default is free software, but you can find instructions on the wiki how to install non-free software. All right. Thank you for watching this video of me reading from a website. And if you find this content interesting, you can find more on my different socials and my GitHub for if you are interested in my programming stuff. And let me just show you this animation again because I like it and it's really fast. So give me money on Patreon if you feel like doing some such silly things, and leave a comment down there and tell me what you think about the free system distribution guidelines of the FSF, and I will see you in the next video, I guess. Bye bye.